item 2.2, which is the fire station number 5 supplemental. So this is approval of a supplemental appropriation to allocate $25,000 to the 2013-14 budget to remediate mold at fire station number 5. And is this Mr. Martinez? It's Mr. Parks.
Good evening. Basically, the condition of Station 5 has deteriorated over time from the very beginning of occupancy. And in doing so, in 2009, we hired a consultant to do a water infiltration examination of the facility. In doing so, they, I believe you have the report in front of you, developed a number of deficiencies of the building with recommendations on what it's going to take to correct those items. Along with that is the budgetary component of each of those items as well. And I'd like to point out that that's also in 2009 numbers. The mold that was found is fairly small. It's in 4 different locations. What's not known is, once they start the remediation, is will there be additional contamination within inside the walls or ceiling where the mold was found on the surface. That won't be known until the actual remediation begins, and at that point the determination can be made how far and how extensive the contamination is. Once that is known, if the cause is from water infiltration, we need to take a look at correcting the reason for the infiltration. If it's found out to be plumbing fixtures, which hopefully that is what it is in a couple of locations, that would be fairly easy to remedy. If we need to deal with infiltration from the roof, which is currently leaking right now, and I would say that as we speak, it probably has drips from the ceiling in their apparatus, or excuse me, in their day room. That has not stopped since the building has been built. So we need to take a look at providing a means to an end at this point. The cost in 2009 was approximately $300,000 to take care of the roof as it is, without doing any major deviation from what the current design. The windows in the apparatus bay, which were leaking at the time, was included in that $300,000, and then the other component was sealing the exterior brick veneer. That's pretty much the circumstances that exist today. So.
Well, the question I had on this one was the funding source.
The funding source
usually associated with groundwater remediation. It says it's restricted, so it's restricted to what?
I am not sure on
Mr. Fields.
I'm actually going to defer to the city attorney as we've spoken about this.
So the source of the money in that fund is are funds that were received by the city in the settlement of the lawsuit, where the city agreed to undertake the groundwater remediation at the airport. The funds, the use of the funds is not legally restricted by DTSC at the time that the settlement was entered into, but the city because the city has to undertake that remediation process, it has essentially treated the funds as restricted, although it has used them for, it received more funds than it was anticipated would be needed to complete implementation of the remedial action plan. And so some of those funds were in fact used for other types of remediation projects. One is the Horseshoe Lake cleanup of the lead remediation in Bidwell Park, and also some of the bills related to Humboldt Road burn dump. The DTSC bills were paid out of that fund. So it has been used a little bit outside of the airport, but I think the philosophy has been not to use them very much and to treat them as remediation funds. The obligation to clean the airport and implement that RAP will exist even if those funds are spent. So it's better to preserve what's necessary to undertake the remediation at the airport.
So I guess I'm confused though. They're restricted, but they're not restricted, and it's okay if we just use them a little bit.
They're not. They were not restricted under the terms of the settlement. The city received the funds and accepted the obligation to implement the remedial action plan but the funds were not restricted. For example, when the city cleaned up the Humboldt Road burn dump and the dumps were closed officially, it was required by the Regional Water Board to restrict funds for the purpose of ongoing monitoring, and we have those pledges of funds to do that. That was not the case for the airport.
So they're unrestricted then?
Yes, legally they're unrestricted, although they haven't been spent freely.
Well, I would imagine the resolution that created the fund and accepted the monies and made the commitment to assure that there were funds available for the long-term remediation at the airport. Perhaps the city council itself committed to restrict these funds to make sure that that would be happening. So, which begs the question then, and maybe this is back to finance, that we've projected costs over time related to the plume at the airport, that there's sufficient funding remaining in the fund with the subtraction of the $25,000 to meet those obligations. The plume still exists.
Right. So I don't know if that analysis has been done by anybody. We do know the ongoing costs every year. I don't have that information. At the time the remedial action plan was first approved, it did call for installing some additional wells and acquiring some property to put the well where the wells would be put, and then the RAP was amended to delete that requirement. So, but things will change over time, and so, you know, but at this point, we're just proceeding really with monitoring and extraction.
Did you also say that those funds are pledged to the airport? Is there a specific amount that's pledged?
No. I think when I talked about the pledge, I was giving the example of the Humboldt Road burn dump, where we were required to pledge, to set aside and pledge certain funds to be used for monitoring the Humboldt Road burn dump waste cells. But at the airport, the city certainly accepted the obligation to undertake the remedial action and then accepted the funds, but there wasn't the same sort of pledge of revenue requirement. And so the Horseshoe Lake lead remediation, I think, was, in my knowledge, was the first time that those funds were spent elsewhere. And at that time, Dave Frank was the city attorney, and I believe did an opinion that that concluded that the funds were not, in fact, restricted, and the council made a policy decision to go ahead and use them for that. They were related to remediation of environmental contamination, although it was a completely different site.
So, and are we still contemplating that a mold infestation at Station 5 is considered a remedial act? I mean, it's certainly a industrial safety remedial act. Is it an environmental form of remediation, though?
I mean, it's different. I think the council could certainly make the decision to use that money or to take the money from elsewhere. I mean, that's
the golden question.
Can I ask a question on, in the report, it says that we're pursuing whether this was something that will be covered under our insurance policy. At what point do we find out whether or not this is something that's covered under our insurance policy and whether that $25,000 is going towards our insurance deductible or towards the actual?
You know, Councilmember, that's a good question. And in speaking with Administrative Services Director Constantine, his dialogue with the insurance company is that if this is the case that it's in the $25,000 that is in our deductible, so the city would have to cover that anyway. He did indicate after some discussion that the likelihood of this being covered by insurance was not probably likely. The reason why is because of, I believe, the history of the facility and the endeavors that had occurred since 1998 when the station was accepted or actually occupied. We've had these issues since then, so it's unfortunate that we didn't pursue corrections at that time. I don't have the history of that, but I do know that according to Mr. Parks, that in 2005 we spent approximately $68,000 to reseal the brick and recaulk windows. In 2009 we spent $30,000 to replace a combination water heater, and then of course the study that was done cost us about $14,000, which identified the $650,000 in repairs that needed to be made or proposed to be made. The history I have is that this building has leaked, unfortunately, or had construction defect problems since the day it was constructed. So, but that was in 1996. Our warranty period clearly has expired. So it will probably be the city funds that would be needed if additional problems are realized. The concern, of course, on staff's behalf is even if these corrections occur, hopefully they are related to pipes versus water intrusion, because a temporary fix will not correct the problem. So we'll know more after,
Right.
I think, after the contractor comes back.
Two of the areas, I'm sure of, there's no plumbing in those areas. It's definitely coming from the roof or the masonry itself, and that's confirmed by the reports that I have from the previous investigations back in the early 2000s.
So you would probably describe the odds of $25,000 covering a complete repair and remediation to be somewhere near zero?
We could remediate the existing mold for that. The mold would come right back in those two areas.
Right, it's the repair to avoid future.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you were clear in the report. This is for the cleanup, not for the big fix.
Mayor Grundle, I
Yes.
have a question. Going back to the fund that would, or the monies that were issued to correct the airport plumes, we are proposing taking $25,000 away from that fund, but there has not been an analysis on what the total cost of cleaning up those airport plumes are and what the effect of removing this $25,000 from that fund would be. And the report shows that currently the indoor air samples are lower in fungal spore levels than the outside air. So I would rather us wait to do that analysis of seeing where that fund balance is and what those costs from the airport funds are before we go forward, because according to this report, it doesn't seem that there's an imminent danger to the employees that work in that fire station. And we don't know what the impacts of taking the $25,000 out of this account would be.
Certainly, that's possible.
Mayor, members of council, that is something to consider. Again, as your staff, anytime we have a situation where we might have a verifiable situation, in this case a consultant indicates that there is surface mold that could lead to mold behind walls, we do not want to expose our employees or the general public to any safety hazards. I believe, this is a concern because specifically this fire station houses individuals 24 hours a day, which means they sleep in the facility, they live in the facility for the most part. I can understand Councilmember Schwab's concerns as well, especially given our financial situation and the what-ifs. But I do believe it's in the best interest of the employees of the city to fully understand what those impacts are. I would be hesitant to say I'm not concerned that we might have a potential problem, and I would feel more comfortable if we knew exactly what we were dealing with. And I know that the chief, interim chief Carter, is working on plans as well, just on those what-if situations in terms of service delivery.
So it's hard to completely tell, but just looking at the fund summary for Fund 312, at least this year and last year, costs associated just with groundwater remediation at the Chico Municipal Airport are coming in budget at a budget amount of $172,000, but then it varies dramatically from the prior, from 11-12 and 10-11, other than the costs are clearly going up at a pretty exponential rate But taking the 172, we would only have 3 years' worth of funding just for the groundwater remediation, but I don't know if that's a replacement of pumps or monitoring wells, or, if there's one-time expenditures in there, but it would be concerning.
I believe some of those expenditures were related to amending the remedial action plan.
Oh, okay.
So, and Mr. Martinez may be able to fill those in. So they would be more one-time, but that's not to say that those those one-time costs to do things like that won't recur in the future.
Actually, I was just preparing to mention that fact that we're still in discussions with DTS about some of those changes. Some of the sampling does look good, but we're still in discussion with them, so we're going through that process now.
I'd like to add a little bit of clarification on the fund also. We did end the fund June 30th, 2013 with a fund balance of $988,000. So it looks like a fund summary, a budget fund summary was being used, at which time we didn't have actuals. Okay. We did expend about $130,000 last year. Again, that's not part of the fund summary. So far to date, we've spent $20,000 in 13-14. Just a little bit more clarification.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Fields. Okay, if there's no further questions, all right, then let's open the floor to Mary Fitch.
Good evening. All of my remarks have been addressed, and I wanted to thank Councilmember Sorensen for bringing up the funding source on that and for the discussion that's been had. We've been, my colleagues and I have been concerned about some of the funding that's been going on lately, and so it makes me happy that it is being addressed in this case. And just to state my point of view on this, I would really like to see us know how much the total cost of the project is before you actually allocate any money, and that you find a more appropriate funding source, because this feels like what the prior staff has been accused of doing, which is taking whatever money is hanging around and using it. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Mary Fitch. Okay, with that, then we'll close the public, or excuse me, Councilmember Morgan, sorry.
No, you can close the public. I was going to ask a question. I just want to clarify. So if we don't vote to use the $25,000 from Fund 312, does that mean we're not going to tear into the walls at Fire Station 5? And my follow-up question to that, following up on what Councilmember Schwab said, is it possible to continue monitoring that until it gets to a dangerous level? Because clearly it isn't now. And I think I also understand what Vice Mayor Sorensen is concerned about. I think what we're all concerned about is if we do spend $25,000 from anywhere and we open up those walls and see that we have something, and now we have to go from $25,000 to $638,000, and we cannot do that, then what? But right now it doesn't seem like we're in imminent danger. But I also appreciate the city manager's concern that we have a responsibility to the employees, and if that gets monitored and continues to have a lower spore level than outdoors, then I hate to use the word punt, but I don't. We're not in a situation that we can rebuild Fire Station 5. So I guess that is a question. If we're voting not to use that $25,000, are we also voting not to open the walls of Fire Station 5? Or are those two different issues?
Or are we not going to do anything with the fire station? I mean, I guess those aren't the only options. We don't necessarily have to have firefighters in there with mold in the walls.
Well, that would be another.
One more possibility.
For a different agenda.
So subtle.
So I guess I was looking for clarification. Is that a yes? Is that a Ruben question? Ruben, if we don't give you the money, are you going to go and tear the walls apart anyway?
I think, if the question is the funding, then there'd be the possibility of looking for other funding and the timing of that possibility, whether it's immediate or whether it's down the road. If the question is whether we open the walls or not, if there's good practice, which I would recommend, and that is if you find mold, you chase the mold, and you go where the mold is. it can be dangerous. The particular sample, I'm not familiar particularly with who or how they did the sampling. They did the sampling, they say it's the same as the outside air. But at the same time, we do have mold on the walls, on the exterior. And if it was in any residence or if it was in any school, it would be chased until it was removed. There's a couple of things that are happening when you have mold like that, and that is that it's decaying from the inside. Wherever that moisture is, it's decaying from the inside. If you don't stop it, you're going to have that continued decay. So I think there's still some options. There's the do nothing option. There's evacuate the building option. There is the search for additional funding option. So there's a variety of choices out there, I think.
Yeah, I can appreciate the fact that we're not in a position, it would be completely unreasonable, at least in my opinion, knowing the history of the building, to think that there isn't a problem, I don't think is rational, and I don't think it's remotely responsible to expose workers to it. So, but I would appreciate when we get these and the funding source is a little odd, if we'd get some discussion on that. I think that would be helpful. But with that, I'll move approval of item 2. Wherever we are, 2.2.
So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Abstentions? Okay, that passes 5-1-1.